Hello and welcome to another midweek message. It's cold today, 6 centigrade, which is 42 Fahrenheit, but it feels like 2 centigrade. They've started putting that on the forecast, feels like. There's the chill factor, isn't there? I think that's what they're on about. 93% humidity, 1031 millibars, and the flag, what's left of it, because it's ripped to shreds after the storm, the flag, well, it's not doing anything, it's wrapped around the pole. It's all ripped apart. I've ordered a new one. Apparently it's disrespectful to fly the Union flag if it's dirty, torn, tatty and whatever. It's disrespectful. So I've got to take that down today and wait for the new one to arrive. Joan in California, nice to hear from you. Do you remember I talked about leaves on the railway line so the trains can't operate? Joan says our big problem is earthquakes disrupting the track. I think we'll stick to the leaves. Earthquakes, I hadn't thought of that. Frank, nice to hear from you with some podcast ideas, talking about, advice on when you're young, where to go, what sort of job to do, your outlook and all that sort of thing. That's interesting. Funnily enough, Frank, I am going to this Sunday talk about people's first jobs. You leave school, what's the first job you go into? Was that the job you stuck with? Or did you go on to something else, make a career out of something else? Be good to hear from you. Rants at protonmail.com. What was your first job? Anyone had an interesting first job? Did you stick with it? Have you, like some people I know, went into their first job and stuck there all their lives, been there like 60 years, and then retired with a clock to stick on the mantelpiece after all your decades of work? Let me know. Talking of trains, we had a steam engine pulling a load of coaches go through yesterday. I didn't go down to the crossing gates to look at it. I've seen it before, but I heard it. We could hear it from here. We saw all the smoke rising above the houses. The line isn't too far from us. If we look out of the back window upstairs, we could see the smoke. And of course, we could hear it. Fantastic. In the old days, when I was, young, steam engines going past was nothing. It was an everyday occurrence. They died out. When was the last one? 1967, I believe the last steam engine ran on the British Railways. 1967. There are a lot of heritage lines, of course, where they keep them running. But the main line now is all electric. And diesel on the odd freight train that we have. We used to have a lot of freight trains pulled by diesel back then. And the steam engines pulling the passenger trains. I used to go and sit by the line. That was fantastic when I was a kid, sitting by the railway line. There was a gate, like a farm, with 2 gates either side of the line, so the farmer could take his tractor and whatever across the line. And I used to go and sit on the gate. The steam engines would come past, they'd blow their whistle, and I'd wave. The drivers would wave back. That was amazing. That's a good experience as a kid. That's something I'll never forget. That doesn't happen. What experience have kids got these days like that? I was on a bridge a couple of years ago. I forget where we were going, but I was on this bridge over the railway line looking at the north entrance to Clayton Tunnel. And above the tunnel, on the hill, there's a house built. It looks like a little castle right over the entrance to the tunnel. And I was just leaning over the bridge looking at that when a train came out of the tunnel. I waved at the driver. He waved to me and did his horn, That took me back to my childhood days when it was wonderful. So that made my day. The train driver waved to me and blew the horn. That's only a couple of years ago. He probably thought, look at that old fool up there on the bridge. When I sat by the line as a kid, there were the signal wires because they were pulled, the semaphore type signals, pulleys all the way along the track. And these wires, you could see them move as the signal went up. Now, the signal was out of sight, but I could hear the wires flapping and you could see them move. So I knew a train was coming. I knew that the signal was going to green. So the train was on the way. It's a shame I didn't take a camera with me. I had a little Kodak. Was it Kodak? A Brownie 127. I should have taken that with me. Taken some photos of the old steam engines back then. That would have been interesting. I once went in the cab of an electric train from down here on the coast right the way up to Victoria Station in London and back again. It wasn't allowed, of course, but I knew the driver and I jokingly said to him one day, you'll have to take me on the train. And he said, yeah, OK. So one evening he told me to go to a certain station down here. He said, get up where the front of the train will be, get on the train and wait and I'll let you in the cab. So I got on the train at the appointed time, and he opened the door between the passenger bit and his cab, and I went in there. And I went all the way up to London, Victoria. Fantastic that was. Going through Clayton Tunnel. That was a real experience. And then all the way back, of course. When we got to Victoria, he said, look, carry my torch and flag so you look like a sort of British rail worker. And I had to hang around because he went to the office. And then when he came back, he gave me the flag and the torch again. And we went through this gate to the front of the train. And we got into the cab there and came all the way back again. That was amazing. When we got back, he parked the train in, there were these huge engine sheds down here, they've gone now. Parked the train in there and then took me home in his car. That was a real experience. How old was I then? I think I must have been mid to late 20s, probably mid-20s. I watched the speedometer as we're hurtling along. We were doing 100 miles an hour as we went back into Clayton Tunnel on the way back. That was amazing. Something else I'll never forget. I was, 3 or 4 years old. I was out with my mother on the pavement. She was talking to the milkman. Now, his milk float, I don't know why they're called floats. Anyway, his milk float was horse-drawn. There's this horse up the front. I'm looking at the horse. Mum's talking to the milkman. And he looked at me and he said, do you want to ride on the float? Oh, yeah, wow, yes. So Mum lifted me up onto the milk float and he G'd up the horse and we trotted off up the road. He took me to the top of the road and he brought me back and dropped me off. That's an experience I'll never forget. You might think, well, that's nothing really, is it? But a horse-drawn milk float, you don't see that sort of thing anymore. That was a one-off. So I really enjoyed that. Moving on to next Sunday, going to talk about jobs, your first job and all that, as I said. I remember at school, I was about 8 years old. And I remember the teacher saying, OK, who wants to be what? What do you want to be when you grow up? What job do you want? And, the majority of the boys put their hands up and they're all calling out, including me, engine driver, driving steam engines. Just about every young boy back then in the 50s wanted to be a steam engine driver. But there was one lad who was sitting next to me. He was kind of my friend. He said, a doctor. And the teacher looked at him and said, well, to be a doctor, you've got to be very clever. There's all sorts of exams you have to take. I don't think you'll ever become a doctor. And he looked quite despondent. And I remember thinking, he can be a doctor if he wants. He's clever. And I thought that was a bit odd for the teacher to say that. Anyway, I bumped into him. Goodness knows how many years later. We were, early 30s, I suppose. Bumped into him in town. I thought I recognised him. And he came over and said, Ray? And I said, Dave? Yes, yeah, school days, yeah, all that business. And I asked him what he was doing, how he was getting on. And he said, I'm a doctor at the hospital. He was a doctor. And I reminded him, I said, do you remember that teacher? Oh, yes, he said, I remember her, telling me I wasn't clever enough. And I said, what a shame you don't meet her now. And he said, funnily enough, now this is a real good coincidence. He said, funnily enough, a couple of years ago, she came into the hospital. He said, although she was a lot older, I recognised her and went over and asked how she was. Apparently she looked at him, frowned, saw his name tag and said, it's you from school. And he said, yes, it's me from school, the one not clever enough to be a doctor. And now I am a doctor. I love telling people that little story. It's brilliant the way it worked out. Just going back to the Clayton Railway Tunnel, I know what we were doing there. There's a little pub just round the corner from the north entrance to the tunnel. We'd pulled in there and we were watching the vintage cars, the London to Brighton vintage car thing, which happens once a year. So we pulled into the pub and we just wandered over to the bridge to have a look at the little house on the top of the tunnel entrance, the kind of castle type place. Have a look on Google, look at Clayton Tunnel. You might see a picture of the little house. It's like a castle. So that's what we were doing, watching the London to Brighton vintage car thing, which happens every year. One year we were out there somewhere in the countryside watching them go by. It was lashing with rain. These poor people, they're 1920s type cars, some of them. So they're sitting there out in the open. They've got capes on and things and umbrellas and they're plodding past in these cars. Toot, 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 toot. Absolutely awful weather, but great fun though. They all congregate down at Brighton and then head back up to London again. Don't forget to email me, raysrants@protonmail.com. What was your first job? Any incidents at your work? I don't know what sort of incidents, any memorable things that happened. For example, if you're a train driver giving people a ride on the train that you're not allowed to do, I don't know what would have happened if we got caught. I don't think they would have sacked him because he'd taken other people. He told me he'd taken other friends up the front. Whenever we went past a signal box, he knew all the signalmen and the railway workers. He just said to me, OK, get down, there's a signal box coming up. So I got down on the floor. Enough of that. I shall see you on Sunday with a hour-long episode about, I don't know, about jobs and incidents and whatever, all sorts of things, car runs, train rides and goodness knows what. Take care, be good, be bad, don't get caught. Look after yourself, stay healthy. And I haven't mentioned the C word this time, have I? I know I did last Sunday. I said I wouldn't and I did. We're getting closer to the 25th. Take care, thanks for listening. Bye-bye for now.